All right, then I will go ahead and call this meeting of the City of Boise Public Works Commission to order. And I will start things off with a quick roll call. So please let me know if you are present. Commissioner Ellis,
Present.
Commissioner Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Cross,
Present.
Commissioner Wertz, Commissioner Collette,
Present.
Commissioner Crowder, Commissioner Locke.
Here.
All right, so we have quorum and are good to go. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes from our last regular meeting on May 3rd. And I would entertain a motion.
Yeah, I make a motion to approve last meeting's minutes.
Do we have a second?
Second, just one moment, sorry. With the amendment, correct?
Yes, you have the language there, if you could.
Do you want to show?
Alter the, yeah, we'll just share it up, sorry. If it,
I have it.
you have, who has it?
Oh, okay. I make a motion to adopt the minutes from the May 3rd meeting with the amended slides from the proposed fiscal year 2024.
Second? Do we have a second on that motion?
Yes.
We have a second. All right, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. That brings us to our regular agenda. And up first is an update on the recycled water program, and I will turn it over to staff.
Chair, thank you very much. So based on feedback that we received back from the commission, we have kind of revamped our approach. And this is our kind of maiden voyage on the revamped approach. And so the intent is, based on the feedback that you all have given us, is that we want to focus in on a couple of specific topics. At the beginning of the fiscal year, because we're kind of in the middle of the fiscal year, we're not going to be able to like go fully over to the new approach just yet. So this really is a test run on kind of concept, like a proof of concept. Coming in October, the beginning of the fiscal year, we will have a workshop with you all to identify a couple of topics that you want to do some deep dives on. We have recommendations. We have some thoughts on that areas where we could use some help, because there's going to be some pretty big policy implications of some of the work. And so I'll give you an example. We're going to start working on a strategic solid waste plan. So that's our trash, recycling, compost. Zoom way out, big picture. Where do we want those programs to go? Setting up like kind of a new course for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. Those are pretty big discussion points. There's going to be a lot of public interaction. You will be a big part of that. In a way, we would like you to serve as almost like a focus group, but given your knowledge, you're going to be a little bit of a Peter focus group in that you have more of a background than most citizens will have. So that's what we'll do in October. Today is the recycled water program, another topic that could be one of the ones we want to cover for next year. But again, we'll all talk about that and you all decide. So this is really our test run on kind of the new concept. This is going to be much more of a dialogue, much less us talking at you. We do have some slides up front to kind of tee things up. You saw in the packet that you received a lot more information and tried to give you some stuff really to chew on. You may have a lot of questions based on the packet, maybe not so much. We're going to see. We're going to get into that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to staff, in particular Haley Faulkner, who is the environmental manager, who is overseeing currently all of the water renewal planning. The recycled water program. The program manager is Royce Davis. With Haley, Royce, the two of them are really kind of getting this up and running. Haley from making sure it's aligned to the utility plan and our larger planning document, and Royce really getting into the day-to-day of we're truly starting a brand new program, new facilities, everything. And Royce is doing an incredible job. It is intense. There's a lot of moving parts, lots of swim lanes that are interacting, and Royce is doing a great job on that. What we want to talk through today is we have some policies. A couple of initial policies that we want to bounce off and get your perspectives on those. Talk about some of the community engagement pieces, and are there other things that we ought to be considering, other groups that maybe we've missed. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be talking about specific to the recycled water. Any questions before I turn it over to Haley?
Any questions from the commission?
Ms. Faulkner.
Thank you, Steve. Chair Commissioners, Haley Faulkner, Environmental Manager in Public Works. Royce and I are going to tag team this conversation. Really excited that it's less of us and more of you. So looking forward to just all of that. I think Steve shared this. Really, my intro point here is just we are sort of anticipating your feedback today. Really hopeful that the background content that we shared was useful and that we can really dive into those questions and drive the dialogue today. The way that we have this set up is that Royce is going to share a little bit about the overview and really allow us some time to hear some questions from you all, clarify anything that was unclear or dive deeper if there are areas you want to. I'll come back up and we'll talk about our two policies, highest and best use and the good neighbor policy. I'm excited about that conversation, and we'll close out with where we are with our stakeholder engagement and the pilot tours and kind of just where we're headed next. So if that sort of format sounds good, we don't have much in the way of content to share actively today, really just framing the conversation and maybe seeking kind of that feedback and content from you.
Just one thing I wanted to add, Haley, sorry to interrupt. Just be thinking as we're going through the information and kind of how setting it up, not just questions about the recycled water program, but maybe some notes on like, yeah, this, how you framed this or how you set this discussion worked well, or maybe next time you could do this, thinking about the structure of how we're going about this, the interaction would be helpful.
And I may step out of my presenting on recycled water into serving a bit as facilitator with Steve because Colin's not here today. So I think certainly for the first topic, we're here to answer all the questions. I think for the next, obviously if you have questions, ask them, but we'll really probably be trying to pull more and more information out of you. And some of the pieces we may not necessarily have answers today, but you are a source of input and feedback into the program that we would then come back to you and say, okay, if we do this thing, does that hit the mark with what you had shared? So just kind of framing up that facilitation piece of what we're hoping to get out of today. I'm gonna wear two hats. But Royce, I think you're up first.
Hello. Excited to be here today to talk about the recycled water program. I know I think this is the third time I've presented to the commission. And excited for, when the water utility plan started in 2018 and finished up in, it was 2020. But, the whole plan, and it's been exciting because since that time, with the recycled water program, it's really getting to where all of these ideas and plans and things that we've had, a lot of it's really starting to get traction and we're starting to get some movement. And like Steve mentioned, there's a lot of things going on and we got a lot of different projects and work. It's I find really exciting. We've been working on over the last few months and for a year and a half. So excited to talk about that today. And again, from the beginning of the water reach plan, the goal is to have the recycled water facility up and running. I like to say January 1st, 2029, which I think everybody laughs at me, but that's my goal.
Stretch goals.
Stretch goals. We just will have a firm date of January 1st, 2029, or January 2nd, since that's holiday. That's the goal. And, at this time, I think, we're working hard to make that happen. Why recycled water? We're trying to keep, this is our why goal statement. We're trying to keep water local, protect the Boise River. Part of this is groundwater recharge. So we're trying to put water back into the ground to bolster the groundwater supply. And then really to me, it's like planning for the future. It's not about 2024, it's about 2044, right? Where's Boise at in 2044? To me, it's starting the recycled water program now, building the framework so that 20, 30 years from now, we're setting Boise up, for the future or whatever comes. Current priorities for the recycled water program. As we mentioned before, the advanced water treatment pilot we have out on the Micron parking lot. So the pilot is up and running for the last 6 weeks. We started sampling about 4 weeks ago, and we're just now slowly starting to get us some data back. So it's been a team effort from the Public Works and from the installation, utility maintenance, and operations support from the operations staff, Lander and West Boise, and Just a big group effort from Public Works overall, Environmental Division helping with sampling and getting things set up. Team effort to get the pilot up and running. So we are pushing water through the pilot now. Our goal is to run 40 hours a week, 40 hours of production. So we start on Monday and we end on Friday afternoon, trying to put 40 hours of water through the pilot.
Royce is being somewhat humble. The team, what they've been doing the last 6 weeks in particular is like, it was an all hands on deck situation, and to see all these people come together from across the utility, dropping what they were doing here to come support the pilot and all the sampling, it is a big lift. And Royce has been leading the team, and so thank you.
And it's like Steve said, we sample twice a week. So right now it's Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Tuesday we do 120 samples. Thursday we're up to like 150. So almost 300 different samples we collect each week and ship off to the city's water quality lab and then off to different contract labs across the nation. So just now starting to get some data back, and we're excited to see how the pilot's it's working and the performance.
Could you speak a little bit about what we are testing for some of the things you're saying?
Yeah, one, it's based off of the drinking water standards. So out of Idaho Department of our environmental quality drinking water standards, there's groundwater rules, which has, I think there's 300 different analytes in those rules, but it's there's nutrients, so phosphorus, ammonia, there's metals, mercury and lead. Really any metal in the periodic table we're probably close to sampling for. There's emerging constituents. PFAS is a big one. We have a whole PFAS monitoring plan for the pilot. We're excited because we have some new media and new methods that are kind of developing for removing PFAS. So that's going to be one constituent that we, hone in on and learn a lot about. There's other emerging constituents, NDMAs, 1,4-diazone. There's other things. There's background stuff that we do. We do sucralose and probably testosterone throughout it. There's all sorts of different things. There's almost 700 different analytes, and then we'll start narrowing that list down as we sample and don't find things. There's a lot. It's a big list. So yes, we have the pilot. That's one of the priorities now. So we'll run that for the next 12 months. We have 2 operation scenarios. 6 months for one scenario and 6 months for the second. We'll run that for the next 12 to 18 months. So pilot's working great. The other part that is the recycled water facility and groundwater recharge site. So we need to figure out what we call the recycled water facility. We've named it Jasper in the previous meeting. So off the semi-precious stone. So we're looking for a site for Jasper. So we're currently doing a business case evaluation on, I think there's 5 different properties, trying to figure out which one would work out best based off of cost and logistics with pipelines and different things like that. So that's going on now, which is a big lift to figure out where we're going to put it. That's a big decision that we're going to have to make where the facility actually is, because once we make that decision, it unlocks a whole bunch of different projects and things that we can start moving on. And then we have the groundwater recharge site. So part of the project here is, the highest and best use. So what are we going to do with the water? One of the things we're going to do is groundwater recharge. So where are we going to put the water in the ground? We've worked to try to find locations south of Boise. We were trying to find 3. We found 1 that we have an access agreement on that we're currently drilling. 2 different wells, 800 feet each. So that's going on now. So we're out drilling south of town. You're headed up to the prison or that way. You look off to the left where you go up the hill, you see a big drill rig. That's us. So we'll be out there for the next 3 weeks on that site. And then we're currently negotiating a second site to do the same site characterization. So I know the pilot gets a lot of attention or more attention than this work here, but there is a ton of work going into that. Now, one of the things that I'm excited to learn is more about the groundwater south of Boise. So, where it's at, where it's flowing, how fast it's flowing, We have a whole group of modelers that are gonna collect data and they'll, basically hone in on this model for all these different sites where we're at. So, so that way we can get a good idea of, when we put water back in the ground, where it's gonna go and how it's gonna react with the background geological and hydrogeological characteristics. So a ton of work going on with that too, that at some point we'll be excited to share all that model information. Okay, so that, and then the last one is our community engagement and stakeholder engagement with pilot tours. So, we about 12 months ago, we had a community outreach where we did we met with different groups, the libraries, and did different outreach and things. And we're just now coming back around to the different stakeholders and getting everybody scheduled to come out and do pilot tours. So just now, we've already started, and at the end, I'll kind of go through that list who's been to the pilot and we're planning to get out there. But that's it's going to be a big effort to getting all that scheduled and getting everybody to come to the pilot.
So that's a high level overview. There's a lot of things going on. So we want to stop here and let's just talk about the recycled water program. You've heard probably now three or four presentations. And Haley, if you want to facilitate, we just want to have a discussion, big picture on the recycled water program. What's your perception of it? Are there areas that are unclear? Are there is there anything that's confusing, et cetera? So Haley, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the starting point. We'll kind of see where folks, what questions do you have before we dive into a couple of the details?
All right. Are there parts of the recycled water program that are unclear or need additional information or context?
Lots of questions.
Yes, Commissioner Collette.
And I may be off track because I heard you talking about, future planning and planning from a drought prone area myself and what happens when cities don't plan for it. So if I'm off base, and just let me know and I'll redirect. But so talking about long-term planning, future planning, climate change, are we looking at any kind of plans for storage of water so that if we do have 2 or 3 years of drought, we have something that we can access? Is that part of that, or is that sort of future, not what we're doing right now?
Chair, Commissioner, I think yes, and so, and I do think when we get to the highest and best use policy, there will be some pieces of that. So certainly as we're putting the water into the ground, and the idea there is in a groundwater sort of reservoir, if you will, I think to be answered, it would be when, how, and who is accessing that water back. But certainly the intent of having groundwater recharge is for that long-term resilient water supply here.
And I would just add, our Veolia is our drinking water provider, and they kind of the resource mix. Where do they get their drinking water? 70%, I think 75% is groundwater. And so, thinking long term, we have a vested interest to make sure that the aquifers that water is being pulled from are healthy, they're not falling. So, part of what the approach on groundwater recharge is to think about, okay, if 70% of our drinking water supply is groundwater, it seems like we ought to be, if we can do something to help bolster that. Now, there are water quality concerns there that we're not, and that's a big part of the question that we are working through diligently. But that's some context to the groundwater.
And as a follow-up question to that is if we're looking specifically in the South Horsey area, and again, could be off, but my understanding is that development hasn't really happened there because of access to water. So if we're recharging water in South Horsey, is that going to encourage development, and is that then just going to be used up instead of being stored?
So Chair, Commissioner, great question. I think a couple of pieces on the location in the South. Part of it has to do, we did an initial sort of mapping GIS exercise on where could groundwater recharge be possible. So before we go put a drill out there, maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 layers of what is necessary for groundwater recharge to start to both eliminate or focus in on sites. So the South and Southwest being sort of areas where it is reasonable to do this from a hydrogeology standpoint, and also where we see areas of falling aquifer levels. So while we've got some stability in the aquifer in other parts of the valley, the Southeast has a groundwater management area and is an area of focus for water use. Kind of on the other side of that, I think as far as development goes, I don't know, Steve, maybe do you want to take this?
Sorry, it's a big question, but
No.
the first thing that pops to mind is opportunistic.
It's a really good question, and part of what we're trying to align is through the modern zoning code. The intent of the modern zoning code is to try to increase density within the current city boundaries. Said another way, we don't want to expand out into the desert. The wells, the drinking water wells that are out south of the city are significant wells that provide. So even though we would be augmenting the aquifer, that's not necessarily going to promote growth out there, because through our modern zoning code, we hope to be able to manage that. What appeals to me most about the modern zoning code is it's now our ability to say, maybe in the past where we would have said, no, we don't want that. And that was the end of the conversation. We can say, no, we don't want that, but can we interest you in this infill project? Or have you thought about this area? There's a bunch of open acreage here. Could we work to have you fit better to our modern zoning code, but we want density than in? So it's a really good question. Thank you for it. And we're not trying to recharge the aquifer to promote development in the desert, but I can see the linkage there, and we need to be able to answer that.
And if I may, just one adjacent thing with the modern zoning code, we do have provisions in the modern zoning code now around an assured water supply requiring that new development and redevelopment has to show that there's an assured water supply, not only the physical and legal water, but the continuous reliable water into the future. And so that piece of it kind of married with the modern zoning code itself on where development, what type of development should happen, that water piece is in there as well.
If I'm understanding a different dimension, were you speaking more about industrial development and or residential, commercial?
Anything. I mean,
Okay.
most industry that involves people requires water.
So my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that part of the identification of the potential sites to explore also took into account the existing industrial presence in the area. So as not to like create a circumstance where we would have to duplicate resources or make it slightly more inconvenient for existing industrial use partners over there to remain in that area.
Yeah, Chair, thank you for bringing us to that. And I think we're going to get into the highest and best use, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but the part of the recycled water program is it's an industrial recycled water program to start. And there is an economic development component to this. And so one of the ideas we have for that southeast zone industrial area, it's one thing to have current turnkey development. It's another to potentially have green turnkey development where we have green solutions, green infrastructure. So if you're a company that values that and you wanted access to recycled water, we could say, come to this part of Boise where we have the infrastructure to support that concept. So that is a part of the plan. The recharge component is where if we don't have enough customers, or maybe a customer goes away, that water still has to go somewhere. And so the recharge component is kind of we refer to it as the fat spot on the line, where like, if for some reason we've got to put the water somewhere, we have somewhere to put it. But we'll talk more about that in the highest and best use.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, so are there one or two kind of eventual locations for the recharge sites, or are there multiple locations across town where you actually like pump water into the aquifer? I couldn't quite understand
Yeah.
that part.
Sure. So we are currently looking for two separate sites. One is the Jasper, the site for the groundwater or the recycled water facility, and the second site is the aquifer recharge site. It could be possible that they are the same location, or it could be two different locations. But currently, we're just looking, around the airport and south of the airport.
We're doing site characterization, Chair, Commissioner, on multiple sites. Just so that we aren't, like, if one we test or we analyze, and it doesn't work, we've got other options, trying to find sort of the best and right fit. So our current site characterization is intended to be on multiple sites with the eventuality of honing in on one for each of those.
And the current offloading of water, I think we have a number of mechanisms in the existing system, like into some river. I'm blanking on the word. But a number of other existing mechanisms to do just that, but the new sites are investigated out that way.
Okay,
Does
so
that answer your?
I think so, but a follow-up, please, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman. Yeah, so you were very clear about like the Jasper site, and what was the approximate kind of footprint of that? How big?
Well, I think Jasper, like, just the
Acreage?
facility would be 25 acres. but we would likely look for probably at least for 40, just to have some room.
That's helpful, thank you. And then again, you will have this like groundwater recharge site, but then like, do you truly pump water into one place in the city? Or are you going to multiple places across the city and recharging the water elsewhere? I guess was more of my question.
To answer your question, we're currently just looking for one location.
Yeah.
Infiltration.
And Chair Commissioner, the infiltration basins really look like a pond. So we would pump and pipe that water to one place and spread it out in sort of spreading basins, and then they would infiltrate in. So we would look for one place to do that. If it can be co-located with the facility, the benefit there is that our pipeline to do that is a lot shorter than if we're in two different places or we're further south in the desert, we have to move that water. So does that answer your question? Okay.
Royce, did you have a?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Roger, I have a question.
Any other questions or ideas from the commission? Very good, back to you.
Okay, thank you. I can operate. Okay, I hope we can get excited today to talk a little bit about policy. I know that's maybe counterintuitive, but we're excited to talk to you about it. So just, we haven't formalized a lot of policies. We talked a lot in this group, but you're creating an entirely new program from the ground up. It's not only building and designing some processes, but we've got a lot of pieces to consider. A big conversation around why policy, why an entire area of work around this is so that we don't get 5, 6, 7 years down the road and sort of wonder why we made a decision, or get asked, what about this? There's another thing, you can put the water here. But putting in some of that thought now to what do we really want? It sounds like a lot of water, and then at the same time, it's really maybe not a huge amount. We want to do the right thing with the water. There's a lot of opportunity. And that was really the beginning of the highest and best use policy. So what is the best way for us to put this highly treated, advanced treated water to good use? And so the sort of simplest way that we've written this out is that we want to establish an approach for prioritizing where the water is used based on a variety of areas. So we'll talk today, I want to hear from you all on community values, market signals. So what's happening, who needs the water and how is that changing over time, and risk management. And that could be all sorts of things. We talked about one of an industrial user is our key end use, and they don't need the water for 2 weeks. That's a risk, and we need a place to put that water. So how do all of those things come together and craft the City of Boise's highest and best use for this water is this. So the things that we considered in how we would prioritize the end uses or the priority use include really at the top of the list, the opportunity to offset drinking water. So we want to focus, I guess the other way to say this is that we allow drinking water to be used for drinking purposes, and that if we can use this recycled water in a way to offset places where drinking water is being used for non-drinking water purposes, that's a high and best use for us. That we offset surface water to enhance the Boise River. So if there are places where we can keep more water in the Boise River and use recycled water for another way, that could be a priority. The cost effectiveness of treatment and distribution. So we talked a little bit about one of those kind of scenarios if we're near, in proximity or location to end users. Risk management, both from things like, where the water goes, but also what level are we treating this to, and does that match with the end use? And then can we use the water for the things we want to use it for, and will the community accept that? Said in more plain language, I guess. So I'm going to just start with our questions, I think, because I'm hopeful that the level of detail that was provided in the memos was certainly much more than we've shared here in the real kind of bare bones of what went into the policy. But I think kind of first off, do you all have any questions or feedback on the prioritization factors? And I'll put those back up and how those connect in with community values that we might use to evaluate this. So I will leave this up. Is that okay? I know we're not. Okay, thank you.
All right, questions and feedback from the commission. I think I'll kick off. I have a question about cost effectiveness and risk management, and how you might tease out short-term versus long-term in those considerations. Because what might be a short-term cost saving could be a postponement of some greater cost down the road, or what you might do to manage an immediate risk may have other unintended circumstances. So I'm wondering how that is teased out in these, or how that might be teased out on its own.
And I think that's entirely the intent of this, is to be able to do that. I would like to maybe just hear a little bit more, like, do you have maybe an example in mind of the, let's use the cost effectiveness piece of that? And I guess maybe I have one to offer,
Sure,
and then I'd like
yeah.
a reaction, perhaps, Chair. So this would be, we're testing 5 treatment processes, and the idea here of the pilot is to understand which combination of them or all of them and in what order produces the type of water quality that they, of course, each come with a capital price tag and an operations and maintenance price tag. And so I think for part of the cost effectiveness is, does that change depending on where the water's going? From where you all are sitting, and how do we kind of, is that a place for us to capture that potential difference?
Yeah, and I was also thinking along the lines of just capital investment itself. If there's are materials that are designed to meet all of the anticipated changes to, say, a regulatory environment for the next decade, but there are things in the works that in 15 years, it could be a very different environment, and we don't have the capital investment to necessarily keep up without adding to it. Is it worth the upfront investment of a higher quality?
So I would, Chair, one of the things we look at and where these prioritization factors come in is they will help plan for us the risk associated with that actual scenario. So we'll run scenarios that will look at capital, O&M, and then give us like a 30-year net present value number. But then we'll also have a risk cost column. So there's going to be a probability of what you just described, that there's going to be, I don't know, some PFAS plus that we don't know, right? That's going to come out in 15 years. We'll test in the business case evaluation. There'll be risks that we try to account for and quantify, not just like, I'll give it a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's like, we really do try to get in and quantify what those costs could be, assign it a probability, do some stress testing on the probability to see like, well, if it went up, if the probability is 25% and it went to 50%, would that change our decision? So that's how we're getting the prioritization factors that Haley's talking about to help us frame the risk that we'll want to quantify. So that we are making decisions, not just on capital and O&M, but also on the risk cost of certain things happening that could influence significantly the investment needed. We're not going to fund that risk column. It's really going to be a differentiator to say, hey, this one is the least cost from a capital and O&M standpoint, but man, there's a whole lot of risk out there that makes us nervous. We would then come back to folks like you, the decision makers, or giving us input and say, here are the options. We recommend this one. Yes, it's more expensive up front, but we're going to mitigate this risk cost on the back end, which really makes us nervous. So that would be an example. Does that help?
Yeah, and then sort of a follow-up that's a little fuzzier and a little maybe outside our jurisdiction with this utility, but looking at social and environmental costs and risks that may be a little more long-term and maybe a little more indirect than a direct systems impact, but investing in higher quality treatment for potential drinking water end use maybe frees up a few more resources that may have a larger impact on public health, on public trust, on things like that. So more of that long-term, less direct systems impact, but more public service community impact.
And share that those types of risks are absolutely captured in the business case evaluation, so that we're getting, and we can, and that's where Steve's talking about testing the sensitivity. It's like we may not get the absolute number right. That's not the goal, but understanding how something might shift depending on the magnitude of risk we get it, it's what we want to have show up in those. I think some of those same pieces will show up in our good neighbor policy as well, which is a little bit different from how we prioritize what the water is used for and more how we want to show up as we're investing this money in a facility and a site.
So a lens that might have gotten in the way of reading this for me is this is more like a procurement and operations oriented policy versus more of a something that would be, you know, published on public outreach materials. Like this is.
So I think that maybe I'm too many computers, but I wanted to have the documents up here. So I mean, so we want, that's certainly intended to be captured here in the statement around community values, and maybe then as you were reading that, as we're talking here, what's missing in the prioritization factors that should be in here? Because as we're talking about where and how the water use, it seems like, share what you're sharing there, we would want to have captured here.
Yeah, so the offsets make sense and the authority and community acceptance makes sense, just from the lay perspective to me. The cost effectiveness and risk management seemed a little more technical, so just the layperson interpretation of it, I think, was muddled a little bit with the procurement and operations interpretation, so that I don't know if there's a slightly different framing or ordering that could make that a little more digestible just from a general public standpoint.
Chair.
Yes.
And if I may, I think those would be. It would be helpful to have a sustainability component to that, to make sure that we're thinking of the longevity of it versus those short-term interests. And so I think for both of those, they really benefit from having sustainability, whether the word itself or making sure that we're thinking towards that longevity.
And Chair Commissioner Morgan, to those two bullets in particular around cost
I think-
effectiveness and risk management.
I mean,
or just-
sustainability overall,
Okay.
but I think those two would be a little bit more clarified with that sustainability component, making sure that we're thinking of cost effectiveness in terms of thinking of financial sustainability as well as environmental sustainability and risk management as well.
Any other questions or feedback from the commission?
I
Yes.
have some more if I can go
Okay,
again.
go ahead,
Thank you. Thank you. This is really helpful. So on point number one, yeah, can we bring these back up? Thank you. So I felt very strongly with that, you know, that I agreed with that first point, because there were so many instances when we're just using water for the hose or whatever, that's totally good drinking water. Everyone knows this. I'm not telling you guys anything as experts that you don't already know, but I think that's really important. Because I hear recycled water and get a little nervous, like, I don't know if I want to drink it, right? Like as a user, I don't know. I'm glad to hear we have a million tests and you guys are doing all the things, and I'm sure that that's happening. But like, hey, let's, you know, that's like sacred, right? Drinking water. And if we can use that for drinking only, I really liked that idea. On the surface water, point number two, I got a little bit nervous about that one because I wasn't sure how, you know, my concern there would be more how aquifer levels are impacted with like wells, particularly where I live in Northwest Boise, Southeast, Southwest Boise. And just to make sure that, like, you talk about community acceptance, right, that all types of water users are recognized, you know, so like well water users, maybe we do use a lot of water, right? But if our aquifer and our water levels aren't, like, we don't have all the water seeping, for lack of a better word, you guys tell me as the engineers, but like, you know, every year, like it'll be later and later that we can use our well because the groundwater is higher, right? It's not as deep. And so I just think we have to be conscientious of all types of water users as we move through this.
Sure, can I appreciate that comment, because it's something that it popped in my head hearing you describe that. This is part of what we're trying to do with these policies. This is not just for this project. This is for the long-term recycled water program. And we do intend on building a fourth, potentially a fifth, who knows, in the coming decades. So really appreciate that, because we kind of zoom in on this particular project that we're working on, but this is the policies that we're presenting are for the recycled water program long-term. So that's a really interesting point you're bringing up, that it may not be in the Southeast 20 years from now. Maybe we're going to put a facility in the Northwest. I don't know.
Yeah.
There may be some tie-ins there to other parts of the community that we're not thinking about currently.
Well, and absolutely, pardon me, yeah, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've got to start somewhere, right? Like, this is fabulous, but I just want to make sure like that the community at large is, impacted. And I also really liked what Ellie said about, not only the, financial side of sustainability, but also the environmental side. I think that's obviously goes without saying that that's important. I know that this was all on your mind, but this is my feedback.
Chair, Commissioner, that's what we need
On
to
the
hear.
policy,
That's
right.
right. Even saying like strong agreement to number one, that's very helpful. On the second one, and Royce, I might ask you to make sure I get this right, because I think even just hearing interpretation of it is very helpful from the amount of time we've sat talking and thinking about it. Part of the intent there too is that as we potentially shift more and more recycled water over time, that also doesn't have a negative effect on the Boise River, but I think maybe expanding into the Boise River's role in sort of that interconnection with groundwater could be a part of that. But is that a piece of this surface water? Is making sure that we are protecting the Boise River and its uses, that we're not ending up pulling more water out that could be sustainable. Am I getting that?
Correct. Or it's that we've got our customers that use Boise River water for purposes, the irrigation, whatever, maybe by the recycled water, and whether they would be able to store more water in the reservoirs or whatever that.
Understanding there's a connection there from all of those.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in my end of town, there's people that use both, right? Like, there's just a lot of that out there still. And then my last comment, thank you. Number 4, I also agreed with that and just kind of thought that depending on how all your tests pan out and what the water can actually be used for, once we know that, then we'll be able to pivot back to like number 3, figure out, okay, that's going to be the end use, right? Like, I think you probably don't really know until you see how your pilot goes. And that's more of a question / think statement. So that was my other point of feedback.
It is, Chair Commissioner, that's exactly right. I think, we anticipate that the advanced treatment technologies that we're using, because they're what's used in a lot of other advanced treatment pilots for recycled water, will prove out and be able to produce a high quality water that we could use for a broad array of things. I think that, and so you probably saw that in the memo where it's like, as we did an initial screening of this, it looks like if we get that quality that we expect, based on these treatment technologies, that go into groundwater recharge and industrial reuse would be the highest and best uses to sort of meet these pieces, that we're producing a high quality to go into the ground, that that's a place, both of those industrial water and groundwater recharge to offset drinking water purposes. But I think that's exactly, we want to sort of name that now, but then come back with the data and say, okay, did we meet that? Can we show that? Can we stand for it? So you're right, it is, to answer your question, yes, coming back with more, but sort of setting the policy framework now to be able to review that once we have more information.
Mr. Colette?
It's Chair Beth, so sort of bouncing off of Commissioner Lockett's comments about the offsetting drinking water. I was just wondering at what scale is that going to be done? Because it sounds like a great, it's a great ideal, but in practicality, like I have a house that has one source of water, but it requires a whole lot of infrastructure to bring 2 different sources of water to everybody's houses. So how do you see this practically playing out, considering that we're not going to put in all this infrastructure everywhere?
Chair Commissioner Collette, I do wish we could, flash back and have that pipeline system. You're right, that's why we don't see sort of residential and irrigation in here as one of the priority solutions, the infrastructure cost and even the timing. If you look at the timing of use for something like irrigation, that we're only seasonally applying that. As far as like with industrial use, being in that industrial area out in the southeast that's anticipated to grow in that way, see that could be potentially a pretty natural way for us to say whether it's voluntarily we have this water or it becomes part of building and developing in that industrial area that the recycled water is a source. We definitely anticipate that being part of the process. And then I think it depends on who the user is. 5 million gallons a day can be a lot of water or not very much. But that's why we have the groundwater recharge kind of back up, there's always a place for it to go.
And so it's really within the framework of within this industrial area, we're making sure good water isn't going to waste.
Yes.
And that's like, sorry, Chair, Commissioner. That is like part of what we've talked about in terms is like, it really is a mass balance, right? For our community, there's X amount of water being used, X amount of water that we treat and put in the Boise River. What we heard from the community is they wanted us to start keeping that water local. So from a writ large, what we're using and then what we're putting in the river will be less because we're gonna take a little bit of that and reuse it. So for the community writ large, it's a benefit. Now, will you get it at your house as a benefit? No. But is it a benefit for the broader community and a long-term water supply? We would argue yes, right? So there is a little bit of abstraction is not the right word, but it's like, it's not a direct benefit to you, but it is a community benefit, we think. That's how we'd like to frame it. So we'll have to think about how to, your question is making me think like, how do we do a better job of framing it?
It's less bringing the recycled water to your home, but making sure that your drinking water isn't going to the airport, to these other places, so that we have that for us.
Oh, go ahead. I have more questions, so.
Any other, before we hear more questions?
All right, so, how will we use this, taking those prioritization factors and with some of the edits we've heard here today. Kind of thoughts on when we should revisit them? Is there a scenario, situation, a frequency, drought conditions, I don't know. But, or an event, if we're doing an update to any of our planning or something happens in the community, when might we want to go back and look and see if those are still the same right prioritization factors? Are we still prioritizing the right things? Should there be a stronger weight behind one of them that's better right now they're sort of equally weighted? So any thoughts on what this could look like?
Commissioners? Mr. Kurtz.
I have to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to commend you for the effort of doing the prioritization factors because, I mean, as this discussion shows, it's pretty, I think we're all interpreting it a little bit different and learning as we go. And one of the things that that occurs to me is I really wanted to prioritize them. And just wanted to simplify. That's probably not gonna work, but it is something I would urge the department to be thinking about how to publicly communicate this. And I'm thinking of like some kind of, more graphical way of showing these because they're just too techy, I guess. Some parts of them are. I think most people can get their head around the presentation of the first one and kind of like that makes sense. You know what I mean? And I just think it's really hard, and I think people are going to say, well, how do you actually use this? And so, the example of a real project coming up and how it's a good idea. I do think it's really difficult. I'm thinking a lot about the public not really understanding, and a lot of the anxieties with reused or recycled water, especially industrial recycled water, that might go into our recharge and be in our drinking water, or potentially. Those are the fears that are going to come up real strong. People don't understand it. This is all being thought through, and that the advanced pilot will actually give data and show whether it's effective. So I just think it's really difficult exercise.
Fair. I'm gonna, I like this where I can turn a question back to you all. As if you've not read what we've already produced on the prioritization factors, and I think Commissioner Woods, in the context of like, this is, we could get behind not using drinking water for non-drinking water purposes. What, just in your own words, what comes out as something we need to be prioritizing around using this recycled water? I heard like public health protection as a, just simplify kind of what you just shared.
Feel free to shout out any.
I'll just, I mean, I think we might all have different responses.
Yeah, no.
I will put that on top of my list just because your program's gonna die before it gets off the ground. And people don't have confidence that you're basically monitoring and treating dangerous constituents that potentially could get into their drinking water.
I'm taking notes. Other.
When I talked about it with peers and they don't even want to talk about recycled water, they want to talk about what's in our drinking water today. It's really like, oh my gosh, forget that, I wanna know what's in the water now. And I'm like, don't worry. Get him on it. So then something that comes, just like a general word of security that keeps coming up for me over and over. And I think there was an email that I got a year ago when I started, they were asking me questions about recycled water, so I was hesitant to even reply, but it was this person who's very concerned, and like, so security just keeps coming up.
Can you tell me more about the word security?
I'm really trying to be diplomatic right now on how to say it.
I'll tell you what I heard though, was
Yeah.
like water supply security. So if it's not that, can you help me?
Someone, someone or something, or doing something that could be malignant to the process.
Okay.
Oh, it's like security of the facilities.
Yes.
Okay.
I actually thought about that too. Are we doing a little
Yeah,
open-ended now, Mr.
Yep.
Chairman? Okay, so I also thought about that, like, it sounds kind of crazy, but like an incident response plan, right? To how you're gonna respond, so that can be answered in number two, right? Like, you're always going to be updating things when there's an incident, like, so how do you respond to it, like, whether it's a cyber attack on the equipment or an actual, like, you know, bad stuff dropped in the water and mixed in, but I think I would just echo some of the security concerns, and then
And does that, if I can ask a follow-up, kind of I like the idea of kind of tying incident response to how we would prioritize or revisit. Does that change, or the need for that change, depending on where the water is going? If it's going to irrigate a soccer field, is that different from going into the ground, or would the same sort of response and kind of revisit be necessary?
So go to the river. Right, I'm having flashbacks to the advisory.
Trade-offs.
Is that even more that, does this give a sense of priority of the water quality, intensity and standards? I think the answer is yes, but I think it's complicated. But I think it goes back to the drinking water that you said, sacred. That always seems to have that as priority, so if it past that, they all are important, it's really hard to prioritize, it's an impossible job.
We're glad for your help, though. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing on the security note is sort of two things. One, people only want three things in their water, and that's H, and O. Right? And the other is just as a physical utility site, I think we've all seen headlines that utilities have been targeted for security threats. And so making sure that the actual physical infrastructure, the buildings, the people, the operation itself is secure. Am I hearing both of those correct?
Chair, I was gonna mention, Chair, I know what you meant when you said HHO. But that's gonna be an important topic that we're gonna need to be talking about. There's a lot more in the HHO than HHO, right? And we drank that already. So to Haley's point about levels of treatment, that's gonna be something we're gonna have to dig into. And we can make this really, 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 really clean, and it's gonna be really, really, really expensive. Do we need to make it that clean? I'm not saying anything yet on that. That's part of the pilot. I'm trying to understand the results and what kind of data sets come out. But it's a really important point that you're bringing up, and that we're gonna have to educate the public on some of it's not just HHO.
And it's going to be very, very clear and communicate very clearly that this project is not for drinking water.
Right.
So that, because I think people hear it and they don't necessarily compute. And then the question that I have to, answer, but the water that you're recycling, what control do you have of where you're getting it?
We will, I mean, because this is focused on an industrial recycled water program will be, targeting industries or commercial users in that area. In this case, we know Micron is the anchor tenant in this recycled water strip mall because they're a water user and we're in their parking lot with a partner pilot testing this. But certainly we can have some level of authority on if we want a particular industry into this or we want it to go to our existing facility. For example, we're not anticipating like food and beverage, the water quality makeup of a food and beverage wastewater may not be what we're looking for right now in this industrial recycled water facility. Could be something we could consider into the future. I think if I may, Chair, I'm going to answer maybe not the question you asked, but that might be a subset. A couple of the key pieces that we're considering and will implement as part of the program is sort of boundary conditions around what can be sent to us. So part of the pilot testing is understanding sort of what we can do and what not what we can't do, but maybe what we aren't going to do. And then that pushes upstream to the discharger that they are required to do some level of treatment. We have, of course, an operating band for that. And much of the analysis of the pilot will also be around instrumentation and controls and understanding what real-time data can we use that we know is an indicator that the equipment is functioning, and if the equipment is functioning, then we know that we're removing these, constituents because we've done this pilot testing. So I think part of my third piece of that though is also then the around policy or permitting, but the levels of I don't know if control is the right word with our industrial discharges to say you're okay here, you're not okay here, but here's what we're going to do about it. You're really not okay here. Here's what we're going to do about it. So I think there's a piece of that changes a bit when our water is going somewhere like the groundwater. So those pieces aren't really in the conversation today, but they'll certainly be parts of what comes back is sort of that complexity of how we push some of this upstream.
I think with anything about community engagement, that's probably going to be a really important piece because people aren't necessarily thinking, oh, well, this is this location, because Eclipse is over here. Like they're just there, and you can tell them, you can tell people, well, don't worry, we're going to purify it. But if no one has specifically told them, don't worry, send used waste, it's not being reused, right? I think communicating this is what we're going to do, but this is where it came from. So it doesn't have all these other things that you're terrified of.
I think that's the tie-in between these messages that the whole, I think it was the offset drinking water. Another way of saying that, the layperson way of saying that is keep industrial water out of your drinking water. Like make sure that they're separate. That's what the recycled water program does, right?
But yeah, I think just in terms of the fear piece of when people don't understand what it is, we're not recycling all water, it's not all waste, it's a specific, and because we only have specific industries we're recycling, we're not going to have these other weird diseases that are appearing out of nowhere because it's just not what we're doing.
Yeah, I think showing the beginning of the use and the end of the use, then how that system is a closed loop system and how that benefits the community is going to be really critical in making community. Another thing that popped up in my head that I feel like would be a concern from community members is like, I don't want to pay that much money for cleaning water that I don't get access to. And so showing how this is a community benefit by having this closed loop system, and it does impact you, just not directly like we were talking about earlier, but this financial burden isn't a burden. It is something that we are excited to introduce to our community because it's innovative and it's going to give us more self-resiliency in the long term versus not having enough water and we're taking away from our drinking water in the future because we don't have enough. And so I think making those connections for our community members is going to help them create that buy-in.
Chair, Commissioner Morgan, if I may, that's exactly it, that we have to add capacity to our system. There's lots of ways we can do that, and doing it this way, the sort of incremental cost increase that exists also produces this local resilient water supply that we can use. And we need to be continuing to lead with that message so that it's not sort of lost in what we're doing.
Chair, I apologize to Abby. We have a new communications manager for water rental services, Abby Hayden. She joined the city, you've been here for about 2 months. And she's already jumping in with both feet. She was out at the pilot, she was out at the well site. She's already doing really good work. Sorry. I didn't even think, and it's like this is really good for all of us to hear, but in particular Abby, because she's going to be helping on all of the messaging around all of this, right? It's complicated, and I really appreciate like we've got to boil some of this down. It's still, we think it's like, oh, we boiled it down. It's like it's still too technical because we're in this like deep literally at times. So anyway, I apologize.
I mean, we did boil it down, but I like that you're here, Abby, because you weren't in the the preparation of it. So I think you'll be able, and I will be able to provide a really good perspective hearing from you all and helping us prioritize and simplify. So I'm gonna go back to the list maybe for my last just overall question and then kind of see where the highest and best use takes us before we move to the next piece. Just, you know, you read in the memo that we did kind of an initial screening where we went through these prioritization factors, and coming out of that, what shook out was initially that industrial reuse and groundwater recharge will be the highest and best uses of this advanced treated water to meet sort of these factors. And just wanted to get any reactions from you all. Does that sort of pass an initial, you're like, yeah, that makes sense? Or would you expect a different type of use for that water to have come out as a high priority?
I don't remember if you shared what the other ideas were.
I didn't, you didn't, that's a good, let's see.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what they, and they're probably gonna think it's the ones.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, if I hear it first.
I mean, I'm happy to share. Is that useful? I don't know if I'll get them all. So certainly irrigation of multiple, varieties, whether it's kind of large landscape irrigation, agricultural irrigation canals, any of those three sort of uses, they come with, of course, their own risks and benefits. The groundwater recharge, industrial use, I feel like I'm missing something from,
We didn't look at direct potable, so direct potable is engineer speak for drinking water. Direct potable reuse, we did not, in part because the community told us very clearly they were not ready. So that became an option that we took off the table. What can be revisited, there's it was talking about market conditions. We're gonna be tracking acre feet water costs, and there is, I can't remember what the number is, but there's a break point where it's like, okay, this actually might start to make sense to treat it to a drinking water standard, but I can't remember what that number is. So that was off the table.
Planting the seed.
maybe, I mean, certainly.
There was a joke at one time about, but maybe that's where.
I mean, we had considered kind of somewhat tangential, but farming. We already have a farm, but it's like more active, like we are the ones creating local produce, and that was one of the initial things we looked at, and we heard from the advisory group. It's like, that's not your core business. Like, that's a neat idea. It's really interesting, but that's starting to get away from what you guys are supposed to be doing day to day. So,
Yeah, sort of differentiating the advisory group from the utility planning and kind of narrow the scope of reuse and uses in this work. I think those are the key ones. There may be some, there was some nuance between like industrial use for directly producing the thing, like we're going to use this water to make a widget, or we're going to use this water for cooling tower water. And is there a difference there as well? Does that change kind of the reaction to how the water gets used? So I think to give the full context, it was all of those. I'm missing one and I can't remember, but I think it was just a sub topic of the others. But again, got to industrial reuse, really direct connection in that house. If drinking water is used, whether to produce the widget or uses cooling tower water, and we shift that to recycled water, there's a very clear connection in offsetting drinking water use for non-drinking purposes, which is a big reason why that one goes to one of the top two. Groundwater recharge really comes with the benefit of being at 24/7, 365 end use that we really do need for any of those sort of off or down periods or lower use periods from another user. But back to my kind of, is there anything that's missing, or would you have all expected a different highest and best use? Is there anything you differentiate on some of these potentially between?
Just chairperson, I think of two, like, to me, like the irrigation, to me, it's like a purple pipe that goes back to Boise where you provide recycled water to, say, your house to irrigate your lawn, or there's, discharge into a canal where you put water in a canal that goes, throughout Boise or the Treasure Valley. So it's kind of how I think of this.
I like sticking with industrial for now. Some of those scenarios, I'm like you, I'm a little anxious. And I think the public would also be anxious about the safety of that, because then you're like, this wasn't your example exactly, but like, yeah, pump it out into the fields, but that just seeps in and gets into the water table and then becomes, I mean, it's all connected, right? It's all just, it's Mother Nature, right? You can't totally isolate the water in your closed loop system, but yeah, I think I agree with the industrial use only part. Personally.
Any other? questions?
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just a context piece, and I maybe it was in here and I just missed it too, but to me, it works that you've got a pilot and it's industrially focused and you're going to test it and you're gonna prove it. And hopefully people are gonna like it and then you're gonna build beyond that later. I see this as foundational and then you expand and go beyond. Because the anxieties of, I don't want to be drinking industrial wastewater, or, you know, those kinds of things can go away if you actually have those steps where you prove something out and then you can expand it. And Steve, you mentioned that expand, ultimately this program has the potential to expand significantly. Each of you don't know. First, you have to get it off the ground.
Yeah, and Chair, our commitment is all new capacity outside of some minor improvements we're making West Boise and Lander to just kind of maximize the existing capacity. All that new capacity for the utility plan, we're committed to recycling the water. So that's the commitment we made. That's the policy decision the council made, and this is that. So we do need 5 MGD of capacity by 2029. That's this part. We're going to continue to grow as a city. All that new growth will be recycled water. That's the intent. So.
And I think Chair and Commissioner Warren's, commissioners in general, I think be thinking about some of that as we go out to the pilot and we come back to you all with data. What information is necessary to ease some of those concerns? I am confident that we're going to have the data and be able to show that. Winnowing it down to something that is digestible, Abby has work cut out for her, and that we can really share that in a meaningful way. I think we'll really be looking to hear as well, have we done it, did we not do it? And then to Steve's point on that future growth, certainly right now, it's interesting to hear some of the concerns certainly around the industrial water. I would say the other side of that is that we know we don't have any sanitary waste in this water. And so we've eliminated an entire suite of emerging constituents in personal care products and pharmaceuticals. However, part of that and part of our testing and the site, the early source water testing, where we sampled multiple sources as collecting input data to building and developing the pilot, and also the treatment technologies that were selected, envision that they may be the same technologies, are certainly the same technologies used in other places to take municipal wastewater and produce drinking water. Not saying that's where we're going, but we're also understanding that if that's how we grow in our future facilities, our municipal wastewater, are we also testing the same technologies in a way that would address some of those same challenges? So it's the whole program in the future, and also it's this project and this facility, and then at one time. And cut back to the question of when do we revisit, how do we know? This work that we're doing, the site characterization, the groundwater, the drilling is all so that we have a very good picture of what's happening and what will happen before we put the water in the ground.
So on sort of that note, I do think that this fits what these factors, maybe a little sanding around the rough edges, but these fit where we're at and where we're headed based on what we know now. And I think the 3 areas that would make us revisit that are catastrophe, obviously, innovation, and then just community guidance.
So to comment on that, talking about catastrophe, and I've sort of referenced it before, but I think it's easy for people to have opinions about what they do but don't like about the water. But when you're in a situation where you don't have water, I think the last time I went back home to South Africa, I was told you can either shower or you can flush the toilet, but you can't do both. And so to have a city that's looking forward and to planning for those eventualities is amazing, and it's a privilege. And thank you for the work you're doing. I think that needs to be in the community.
I supremely hope we're not in that situation, but also that I'm not gonna be something to do really.
So just making sure that we have time to
Yep,
get to the good neighbor policy, maybe we, if there's some sanding around the rough edges for those, bring them back for another quick, speed round in the future.
Appreciate that. I did not do my facilitation job super well there. Thank you.
And so, and then Chair, I think what, you know, depending on where we land in October. You can see this is a big lift, and so I think we're gonna recommend that this be one of the topics that we cover, but. It certainly is up to you, but we'll probably be talking about a lot of this.
And I know we'll work to get you all into a tour at the, I would say, you know, expansion. Okay, let's talk about the good neighbor policy. Really a fun and different one, I think, again, in the context of really easy to zoom in on a facility we're going to build. We talked about Jasper, but also asking for folks to zoom out and consider recycled water, future down the road. How do we do this? This may, you know, eventually expand into all of water renewal or public works, but really looking at first, like, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? It's not only do no harm, but how can we also do some good? I think that's really important, and that really resonated with our team as we were developing this, like, who is a good neighbor and how do we define that? And then who is a neighbor? And we talked about that, you know, there's concentric circles of who may be impacted, influenced, connected to our future facilities and activities, but that anyone who has a direct impact from the construction and ongoing operations of our facility, we would consider a neighbor. Now that's, I think, leaves enough flexibility for us to kind of respond to that. And I think, again, seeking feedback here, this isn't an answer, but that's where we started. Too many mics up here. As we started talking about what impacts could we be looking at as we're looking at future facilities, and again, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? We categorize them similarly to other work that we've done in the climate space, social, environmental, and economic. This is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but a starting point from which we can look at our types of activities. So are we going to have a facility that's viewed from people? Is it only from commercial activity, or is it from a neighborhood? How does that change what it means to be a good neighbor? So kind of taking all of these pieces into consideration, eventually when we start to seek feedback on what it is that we're doing. So again, I don't have a project here today to say, here's how we're implementing it, but you can imagine as we go forward and we do have a site and we're talking about what that site, the look, feel, touch, taste, impact to the community, how can we do good with that and do good by the community? So that's the only slide, so I'm trying to make up some time here. Too many mics. So I'll go back to that list in a minute, but anything else that you all would expect when you think of an industrial advanced water treatment facility that could potentially be near your work, or of course it's going to be in a zoned area for its purpose, but what would your expectations be of a good neighbor around the potential impacts that we would figure?
I would kick things off with just a general note. Reading through this, there was a piece that was missing that was tonally present in this presentation, which was a lot of this is just to minimize negative social, economic, and environmental impacts, but there is no reference to maximizing the positive. And I think calling that out explicitly, there's a lot of opportunity specifically to invest in assets that neighbors would find pleasing, useful, and investments in their neighborhood. So commissioners, what other feedback do you have? Please, words.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I need to know more about what the facilities like, to actually comment on this, because it could be, I mean, is it a water treatment facility, or is it an infiltration basin that looks like a park? It's a little harder to give feedback. And to the point, it could actually be community asset.
Yeah, Chair. Commissioner, I think maybe to allow for that sort of dialogue, I would say if it is infiltration basin pond that does have the potential to look like a park, I think that's the only one here. I think building wise, not anticipating open sort of clarifiers and aeration basins like we have at our other facilities, but that potentially the entirety of the treatment likely would be all enclosed. So we're talking about other buildings. And then potential co-location of the infiltration. I don't know if that helps kind of add to the potential impacts, or maybe that should say, or benefits, impacts or benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, as to that point, could there be some sort of community engagement piece like you have here in the shed with, you know, kids get to come and interact, and I think most kids who've been through the school system, yeah, they've been here once and then they've, you know, but that could be a whole different piece of education and engagement on the other side of town. Without putting in too much cost and making it all fancy and pretty, but something that could be practical, maybe even for older kids, because that's, I think, is probably geared more to younger kids, but maybe high school students or even college students.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
That's
I'm sorry.
the way this the watershed centre has been set up, I think is geared more towards elementary school kids and that sort of educational component, but maybe that, so it doesn't necessarily have to be as much of a facility, but more of a piece where maybe in the construction, although maybe that's dangerous, that's liability, but you know, as this is getting set up, connections with schools or university and engagement with students and kind of getting people involved that way.
Can I ask, Chair, is that for the commission, would that be of interest to you? There's potential for this to be partnering with universities, research and development, workforce development. There's definitely that potential. Is that of interest?
Speaking for myself, I'm 100% behind finding creative ways to invest in not just the necessary capital and infrastructural components to running a public works utility, but also in investing in the human and social capital that makes a neighborhood a neighborhood. And I'll open it up for any feedback from the commission.
Absolutely, what we both said, yeah.
Yeah, I think any involvement of like universities or schools would be really cool.
That's a lot of workforce trainings.
Splash into the career. I think I was.
I think an opportunity to just make it an engagement center or community center will help also dispel any apprehensions towards the facility as well. So making it like an opportunity to have a garden there or a park or something where there is opportunity for people to come and be curious at their own pace. And it doesn't have to be a formal exhibit, but maybe there are placards with information so people can engage with it. I think is really going to be helpful. And then making it, I love the idea of a garden because then it just adds more local resiliency for food capacity. And there's a lot of benefit from that. And you can bring the water cycle into that. And there's just a lot of connections there. But having it be a community center in some capacity, whether it's, you don't have to invest a ton of money in it, I think would really enable a lot of more buy-in and a lot more excitement for that potential growth in that area and the neighbors of it.
I do think that these ideas are informed by and make a lot of sense for projects like Lander Street here. For the new site, we might not have residential neighbors necessarily. So another way of looking at that is our neighbors at a site like that with the industrial users as well as the natural landscape around us. So that I think would be a very different way of maintaining good neighborship with, you know, the wildlife there, with the plant life there, to make sure that it is uninterrupted or interrupted to the minimal extent based on sort of contextually where it's at.
I hear that, I agree with that. But I also think of this space where it is out of the way for many residential folks and it's very disconnected. But people will come out here to be able to show their kids the facility and learn about the watershed. So I think even if the site is very remote and more industrially based, having that as an education center or even light touches just really enhances people's understanding and want to engage with it.
Sure, just to follow up, Commissioner Morgan. So maybe what I'm hearing you say is like, do you think it would be a transparent, it would help on transparency?
Yeah.
Like you're saying, look, come on out, we got this educational garden, we've got this, and oh, by the way, if you want to take a look around, we can give tours, et cetera, but it's not because we are gonna be ironically in a building. Right, and it's gonna be just like, what is that block over there? Oh, that's the recycled water. Like,
Right,
there's potential for it to be kind of like this traditional government, you know,
Right.
we have to think about that.
To add to that, you know, if you embrace the neighbors that are there, so we've got military, we've got the airport, we've got Micron, these are all big industries for Boise. Is there potential for some sort of partnership or some sort of educational component between all of those neighbors
Well, even like,
to help fund it?
even if we could like provide like internships in our area and just get more people interested in like Boise Public Works and like just sustainability, what we're doing here would be amazing.
Okay, I think that's. Got our questions here. Oh, no, I have one because I'm here with the unfun question. So part of this good neighbor policy, and I appreciate, Chair, how we have it framed as sort of how we're going to potentially invest in mitigation strategies for benefits. I think that's, we've seen that come out. Interestingly, we did separate these policies. I can sort of hear our team now thinking about it because we separated the community co-benefits from the good neighbor. That potentially, and I missed that completely here, that the community co-benefits could be a much wider net cast than the good neighbor, which is our much tighter sort of area. And so I think if that changes anyone's thoughts on those previous pieces, but recognizing we have captured all of your thoughts on community co-benefits and we'll include that as we move that other piece forward. This is really in a lot of ways focused on that mitigation of a potential negative, as well as I think there is an investment in that really will for benefit. But I guess none of this really comes without a trade-off. So is there other thoughts that you have or recommendations on the approach to sort of how we invest in being a good neighbor and some of these things that it might be mitigations of some of these potential impacts with kind of our overall, you know, program costs? This is I'm just really curious in your thoughts that we're talking about a really substantial investment in our overall fleet in a recycled water facility and kind of reactions to, you know, the trade-off or the necessity of investing in some of these good neighbor mitigation pieces.
If I could ask a clarifying question on this. So not having too much context on what some of the big ticket items might be on this list that would be that have a significant enough impact on the overall budget and operational budget to be a point of contention. What might examples of those be, or is it truly just the volume of nickel dime?
Chair, a great question. I don't know that I have a good, I think probably it could be both. I think maybe it could even be the potential for optics, not optics, but just as we're investing a lot of money, is it like, and just one, it's another thing. And I guess maybe the question for you all is, do you see it that way, or is it a necessity to kind of be looking at these things, or somewhere in the middle? I don't know that I have the exact answer. So it could be both. You know, let's just take the culturally relevant flora and fauna, or otherwise just kind of the plants and animals out there. Could a change be the actual site of the building is moved in one direction or another to protect a particular area, and that changes the pipeline cost because we've moved it this way? A made up scenario, but one that I can think of looking at these, and is that necessary and important, or is that incremental cost change kind of a trade-off of that?
In my perspective, and I'll open it up to the commission, my perspective is almost sort of a sniff test that is really, really contextual, because I think there's a difference between paying a little bit more for lighting that is downward facing, so you're not interrupting the wildlife versus building some palatial water renewal facility that is like an architectural masterpiece and something like that. So I think there's a sweet spot in the middle that we can find. Commissioners?
I have kind of a random question, and it might not be relevant. So in talking about being a good neighbor and thinking of who those neighbors are and their businesses, and I think it all comes down to money. Is this costing them anything extra, or how is this impacting them?
I mean, I guess to be determined, Chair, Commissioner. One of the things we're gonna start working on, one of the reasons why we're hoping that we can get this as a topic next year. And we have to start working through the setup of the utility. And we have some pretty big decisions to make on whether this is gonna be a separate utility, recycled water utility, or is it gonna be just part of water renewal services, just part of water renewal services that's rolled into the rate. And that the users of the recycled water then just pay an additional premium to get access to the water. We don't know. Those are questions we need to be grappling with. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. We don't know yet.
Commissioner Collette, this is a sort of a framework for making those specific decisions down the road. So it's not any particular project, like single instance of cost benefit that we're looking at right now. It's just what things should be taken into account when a proposal is explored before it's brought to decision makers.
And Chair, you all might say, we don't know what the overall cost is gonna be. Let's just say. Don't hold me on this, right? Let's just say it's 300 million. You might say, if it's within 1% or 0.5% of the overall cost. We're not gonna have a big issue, or maybe less. I don't know. That's kind of what we want to test that. So maybe it's where we kind of start coming back to, like, as we're going through some of the major upfront design decisions, not into the minutia, because that would be brutally painful for you all. But if we were up in the high level, like preliminary designs, like we could do a south facing and have solar panels, but that comes at this cost, but it saves us maybe over a 30-year life cycle this much thoughts. So, and maybe it's a 0.5% premium on the overall program. Maybe that's kind of, and maybe it's hard to answer right now, just because it's also abstract. So maybe this is a hard question.
It's too hard without the specifics and the scenarios, right?
That's right.
But it's good you're thinking about it, right? And I think your example was great. Yeah, all factors that would be considered eventually.
These are definitely pieces that I would like to see in any proposal, having demonstrated consideration for, at the very least, the top tier of each of these three categories.
Sure, that's exactly it. Like we have not missed the mark. We should include these. There's probably some kind of bracketing of what don't go all the way over here. I think that feedback really helps.
Okay, I have one last question. It's completely off topic, but when I think about other, and maybe people don't care as much about public works because they're not as sexy as some of the other stuff, but I think of like the library project and how upset people got that our local library was going to be designed by people outside of our community. And obviously this is a very specialized facility. We need people with those specialized skills, but I think in terms of community engagement and getting people's buy-in, ensuring that we have as much local involvement as possible in the facility will go a long way in helping people to feel favorable towards it, so that it doesn't get that far.
Chair, this is kind of a really nitpicky thing, but under the social, I might put like parking, just because I think it seems like it's gonna be a large facility, and I don't think the businesses around would really like overcrowding.
It's great. And I think that can definitely help it. But traffic as well. Okay,
Any other ideas or feedback? Yes, Commissioner Chair.
I think it's already been said, but that co-benefit conversation, once it's more tangible and with the neighborhood, if you will, business, to make sure that what else would you like to see in this facility is the question, instead of how can we mitigate the impact of the facility. I think that's going to make a big difference.
And I think that, Chair Commissioner Warren, that really broadens it to you all, to everyone. What community co-benefit do you want to see where it's kind of bigger than the immediate neighborhood and really anyone who could interface with this? The other policy that we'll work on and bring back that ties into some of what the Commissioner Colletti shared is a climate economy policy as well. So kind of getting into the economic activity side of this and the, kind of how we get this water out and where it's used. So that'll be coming as well. Okay. We answered these. Royce, I think. Bear with me. I think you're right.
Yeah, I'll go fast.
Let's do our second item on our agenda, Public Works Commissioner role update. And I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, I think we have one more topic on the recycled water. We'll be
One more.
back. Is
One more.
that okay?
Yeah, let's skip a step then.
Chair, Commissioner, back to you. So just want to touch on the tours of the advanced water treatment pilot. So like I mentioned before, we're really kicking things up now, moving into fall with various stakeholders and community. And eventually, you know, the list goes on and on. We've had been pretty busy. Today I did 3 tours.
Jeez.
Not like that every day, but today was very busy. We've been doing about two or 3 a week, actually, for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks or so. So, you know, the point of the tour is to, you know, talk about the purifying water that we're creating, pure water, the technologies that we have there, and the work that they're doing. Educate the community about recycled water and fit for purpose. So whether it's groundwater recharge, industrial reuse, different technologies that we need them all, what technologies need or don't need. And then just answer questions and concerns. And we find that if we bring people out to the pilot, it's a great opportunity to talk about a lot of different things, public works, Boise, environment, community, water in general, a lot of questions around it. So it's been really good to engage with the stakeholders in the community. So far, just you know, we've had City Boise staff, City Meridian wastewater, Idaho Department of Environment Quality, Idaho Department of Water Resources, obviously Micron, National Association of Clean Water Agencies at a conference, and you know, different water contractors and engineering firms have been coming out. So I think what I'd like to get though, you know, is, you know, your feedback of this is an additional stakeholder list of who we'd like to have out of the pilot. So I look at it, looks rather large. But again, we're gonna do our best to try to get as many people out there as we can. So I think you know, really discussion is if there's anybody that we're missing from that list. Sorry if this is the facilitator's job, but you know, if there's anybody that we're missing or anybody you think we should add to that list, we'd like to hear that.
Can I ask one question to help noodle through a little bit more? So it looks like the list of folks who've already been there, it's sort of inside baseball, right? So what kinds of questions have they been asking, and what kinds of questions have not been asked that you want asked from folks who are there?
Chair, Commissioner, I mean, it is inside baseball on purpose. A lot of it as we work through the tour route, you know, what we're trying to say for the tour. I would say that depending on the group, the more technical groups like Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, IDWR, to get very specific questions about sampling, water quality, things like that. As far as really a lot of technical questions, I would like to hear more of the, you know, like the safety concerns about water, what the community is thinking about recycled water, those kind of questions. The ones I like to hear.
Sure, I joined Royce on a couple of tours, and we've had people ask about, so we'll talk about PFAS and show them kind of where it's getting removed, and then they'll almost pretty consistent. It's like, well, where does it go from there? Where does the PFAS end up? It's like, great question. And we talk about the GAC, the granulated activated carbon, and kind of how that process works. So they're kind of like, it's one thing to demonstrate, hey, this is removing really hard stuff to remove. It's like, okay, well then where? it has to go somewhere, right? So those kind of questions have been coming up when I've been on tours. Which I thought was kind of interesting.
So is it mostly like emerging constituent kind of questions or more the waste disposal dimension?
Waste is like the follow-up that I've been hearing, I've heard like at least 4 or 5 times, and we'll get into that trailer, it's like, so where does it go from here? So what do you have to do with it? It's like, well, that's one of the things we're gonna need testing, figuring out, 100% know how that'll work out.
And we have, the tour broken up into kind of the groundwater recharge part. Of course, we can't show that in the same way as more of a conversation about what that is and what we're analyzing. I think a lot of questions there that are really just, it's not a super well understood kind of thing, the groundwater and the aquifer. And so that's been a really great place for dialogue and questions about, where the water is, where the flow goes, what happens when we do this and where we're gonna do that. We do have a list of the questions we've been asked, but we don't have that with us, so I appreciate the question. And
We can get that, probably get that back.
Well, just sort of the general, like the form and function of those questions, I think that the end product of those technical questions, like having that answer and offering it unprompted to people who do have these layperson safety concerns will sort of assuage a lot of that and really help to show that we know what we're doing.
I would say, Chair, probably one of the more difficult things I've kind of heard mentioned here is trying to take very technical things and put them into terms and words that people understand, which that's probably been the most difficult thing, trying to explain what UV, AOP, right, like what's ultraviolet advanced oxidation process and how does that work? It's been very difficult trying to put that in terms of so people understand, and we're working on that with Abby and consultants and things to try to get that, so we can do that better job of that.
So then I just have 3 groups of folks, and then I'll let the rest of the commission talk. But for missing key groups, once on the list, I just want to make sure that it's prioritized. Make sure that the local tribes in the area are invited to give a tour and see the impact that that's having. And then agricultural communities, local farmers, agricultural associations, even USDA, FDA, have those folks come out and see what could potentially be down the road if the mood is there, if the treatment process is there for potential end use. And then I'm sure the Venn diagram for a lot of these folks is a circle with folks at USGS, but making sure that they're looped in for some the geological survey.
Okay.
Commissioners, yes, Commissioner Cross.
Chair, I would just like to add on to that list. I don't know if this is feasible or not, but maybe inviting like the wildland firefighters and fire chiefs, because if they could be able to like use some of that recycled water, that could be potentially interesting.
Chamber of sorry, I'm not sure if it was on the list, but was the Natural Resource Conservation Service on there?
I don't know what our CFC is.
Yes, I don't know if they are, but they should be, so that's great. That's why we're doing this.
Sure, I could. I saw Black and tribal groups on there, but Latina groups, since they're a huge part of our population, would be another specific group to invite. And ODARE was the first one that came to my mind, but they may not be a best match, so another organization would be better suited for it.
Had a few represented on the advisory group as well, so we can go back. We have that. I don't know if it's on there, but it's, we want to re-engage with the advisory group too and come back out to the pilot.
Commissioners?
Thank you, Chair. Mike Rod might have a good sense of the associations that they could bring in that are in the same business, but the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry would be a good organization to have. It occurred to me also just that high school physical science classes or instructors in their classes might be a great asset to have familiarity with the project. I mean, if they're want to bring out students, might be a good.
The legislators from that district or the surrounding districts out there. maybe legislative leadership even.
Then maybe farther down the list, recreational or outdoor hobbyist groups. I know a lot of those folks, like their Venn diagram again, they're probably all plugged in one place or another on this list, but.
And just a plug for us to be able to, I really want to go. Yeah, I like speaking for myself, I guess. We're all made. We're all made.
A lottery ticket, yeah, a lottery ticket. Average Joe and Jen at one.
Any other ideas, commissioners? Right, everyone. Right, thank you. Right, and now that brings us to the next item on our regular agenda, which is an update on the Public Works Commissioner role. I will turn it back over to you.
Chair, thank you very much. We're gonna have Kathy Schoenfeld cover. Colin's gonna cover this. He's out sick, so Kathy is going to pinch hit. Which is awesome. Thank you for doing that, Kathy, and we're gonna kind of probably tag team in certain ways. Kathy.
I am Kathy Schoenfeld, and as many meetings as I've been to, I have not actually presented, so. Interesting. Admin support services manager, but many of you know me as also commission support, so kind of different to be on this side. We'll see how this goes. So the role update. We have a recap of the recommendations. You've all seen in your packets that suggested quarterly meeting cadence and with an annual meeting, which would be for kind of setting those topics and a little bit of social networking and kind of get together opportunity for you all. More of a focus on those long-term strategic topics that can build from meeting to meeting and maybe fewer topics so that they have an opportunity to build and dive deeper during the meetings. And having you all provide that more roundtable discussion to provide that strategic long-term information that we're all seeking. The redesigned meeting structure. So there would be the 4 main meetings with the additional 5th one that would be that kind of annual topic setting for the year. And then we are still moving toward that new cadence, and we were working very hard to get you the materials early this time. We are still working very hard to make that happen going forward. We have it all calendared out, and we do strive to get you things in advance so that you can review the packets and have time to digest and do the homework as requested. So anyway, that is definitely a goal that we are working to achieve. And then regular business items would still be included in the meetings as needed. So obviously in November, for example, is the annual elections that we have to have, or any other things that come up that's just kind of run the business type items. So today we wanted to get some feedback on this updated structure, kind of how it went today, and the meeting format that we did today, or if you have any suggestions for changes on that, or the depth of the topic that we were able to dive into today, and just we'll kind of capture some notes on your feedback, but anything that you might have on that.
Commissioners, any top line feedback on the overall structure?
Chair.
Commissioner.
I loved it. It was so nice to have it was, I think, the perfect depth of content to review beforehand. It wasn't too long, it wasn't boring, it was engaging, it was to the point, and got me the information that I needed to, and ask the questions were beautiful to help me engage in, like, oh, when I go back and look at the information, I want to think through this thing and recognize the questions that I have and answer your questions and come with thoughtful responses to those. So I thought it was a beautiful way to like get me ready for coming to the meeting today. And it made me just feel really excited to like dive into the topics a little bit more deeply. And then today's discussion was just that it was the depth that I've been craving for from the meetings. And so just really heartfelt gratitude for all the work that you've been doing to make sure that this cadence is more engaging for your Public Works Commission, and I hope it's more engaging for you all.
Other feedback, commissioners?
It also just felt a little less formal. I know we have to still have the formal component because it's a public meeting, but it definitely felt like more of a conversation and actual contribution and not just a token. We have to say this because someone has to say it and actually getting to be engaged. So I'm excited to be back.
Like that.
Thank you for putting me on my spot.
Chair, I think I'll third the comments already made, because to me, the materials were helpful, but getting a common understanding and actually realizing what I didn't really understand came out of the discussion a lot. So I think it's just a much better learning way to learn as a group. I felt like we learned some things together, which in just a few previous meetings I've been at, I felt like it was more of a solitary experience. So I think it really works.
I would say that I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It felt a lot smoother and at least from my perspective on this side of the table, I feel like I got a lot more out of it and I was able to give a lot more. And I hope that the feeling is mutual on your side of the table, that the style and our input was also rewarding. And I do know that it may have been a little clumsy with some abstractions as our first deep dive, but I think that we may have a little more robust, different kind of conversation when we have something to anchor around, some specific numbers and such.
Okay, perfect. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but in regards to the prep materials, it sounds like that you all found those helpful, useful. But if you have any additional information on the length or the detail, the questions and prompts, sounds like were helpful, maybe. But any feedback on any part of that or anything we could do differently or tweak for next time, then we are interested.
Sure, I guess there was one, like there were maybe one or two questions that were just very jargony, so just layperson that one up.
Perfect.
Yeah, Chair, and one of the things we were concerned about as we were developing those, we didn't want the questions to be leading. Like, we didn't want you to be like, you feel like we were steering you somewhere. So maybe some feedback on like, did you, and it's okay if you felt like, yeah, you were could say you were fishing for an answer or not. Like, we don't, that's not gonna be helpful. We'll give you questions and you're like, I can see what they're up to here or something, you know what I mean? Feedback on the questions, they feel like they were legit.
In my view, that for the level of abstraction, they were like as good as they could be. I think that the challenge there might be when we get into some more nitty gritty, trying to keep that same level of open-endedness to maintain good discussion as we do get into numbers and data. But overall, I think it was good. I will also say that moving forward, I know how heavy a lift it can be to send out materials for a meeting that is happening into the future when we are go trying to run a city. So I myself will be very open to, if 75% of the material is generally correct, that's an A+ in my book. So grade yourself on a curve.
Sweet.
If there's any other
The engineer and scientist is like,
Yeah. And we have. With all due respect.
the content.
I'm just teasing. No, it was great. I'm just excited to see how it evolves too, right? Like this is only like getting our toes wet, so. But I've learned more today than like in maybe several meetings. And it's more engaging to be in person and have everybody here too. So that's partly on me, like when I've had to be a virtual attendee, but overall it's great. So thanks for your work, because that has been a heavy lift. Jennifer left, but she was really involved too, so. Was that Jennifer back there, sitting back there earlier?
Heather.
Am I saying the right name? Oh, Heather, okay, I'm so sorry, but anyhow, I know she was instrumental as well, so please thank her for us, Steve.
Any other input on the prep materials?
Sure, I thought this was, they're definitely a doable amount, so appreciate it very much, and, I don't think that any of the questions were maybe anything like that, but what I felt bad is I really wanted to be here for the social time, that was just one of those days where there's a lot of spinning plates, and I really, I wanted to engage with you guys, it was such an important piece to add to this.
Chair,
I look forward to the next opportunity. Okay.
And we will work to find the time that might work for you all for this work. If I'm not promising that. And so we'll see, it may be that we have to have a couple of times that you fit on another tour, make it logistically will be here, but we'll look into that. My tour extraordinaire here will look into that. And we'll also incorporate some of that social time into the future annual meeting. So we're working for it. Okay. So our final prompt here on this debrief was just overall better able to engage around a topic, leveraging your professional and lived experiences, and any feedback on how that feels.
Any feedback, commissioners?
I think so. I just would re-articulate that it feels more personable and like it's not so high in the sky. We got like a dropped into the airdropped into the information, and then we know we're not going to see it for a couple months. So like only have like a light touch with it. This felt really a lot more intimate. So like we were able to just be able to speak more to it based on our various experiences. So it just felt more real than the previous meeting structure that we had. So really appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, I think just kind of in here, you all and in anticipating the development and sort of evolution of this. I think from my seat, and if recycled water is a topic that moves forward, the ability to sort of pick up where we left off here with like remember we talked about this, but not having to sort of restart and come back. It's like we can pick up where we were here. Remember, we talked about those, categories of good neighbor impacts. Let's talk about it, what's happening next. I think that too, from our side, is going to be sort of building on the input you gave today. It allows us to sort of accelerate the next time we meet as well, which I'm really excited about. And I think Commissioner Morgan, your comments there, sort of that's what resonated for me is I think from our seat as far as the benefit, I think that's going to be the case.
And Chair, I would add that because if this becomes a topic, we have a map for next year. We have a schedule. Royce has things he needs to get done. So we'll be able to tee up topics, maybe in October, we're going to start pre-design. I don't know, but whatever it's going to be. Like we could start to tee that up for you, like, okay, know that we're going to start pre-design. So we're going to start asking some of these trade-off questions when pre-design starts ramping up. So we can frame up a lot of this and just see what's coming. And I think it could really work well.
So if you're gonna hold in 5 years, we'll be already triple gear now.
Any other feedback, commissioners? Well, I would
One more slide.
go ahead.
Turned out. So this was just a recap. I did send this to all of you, and I included the meetings for upcoming so that you have those for your calendars. But the cadence showing the February, May, August, and November regular quarterly meetings with the additional planning meeting in October, so that it allows us to have 4 real in-depth meetings with just a separate 5th meeting for planning seemed like the best strategy.
Sarah, I guess I have a question. When would this cadence start? Does this cadence start this month and then we'll meet again? Like what's next steps with this meeting cadence?
Yes, Chair and Commissioners. So we have this July meeting. We've canceled the August and September meetings. And so our next meeting will be November. Is that correct?
It'll be in October.
October because of planning. So we've kind of now migrated to the new schedule.
Okay,
So we've canceled until our October planning.
okay. But that will be quarter once and we'll be ready to.
Yes,
Right.
so we've now kind of migrated into the new structure.
We'll frame up a couple, sorry, Chair, we'll frame up a couple of topics for you all, not a couple, fair number. And, you know, we'll certainly weigh in on that. We'd really like to, we think this would really help us. But if you have a different opinion and want to maybe focus, that's, we'll have that conversation.
And share another question. What will happen to the subcommittee structure that we started? And I don't think it's as useful now, but wanted to just check in on what that will look like.
Chair, that's a good question. We've been talking internally. We want to see how this one went.
Yeah.
This is, for those who haven't been on a subcommittee, this is very much how the subcommittees go. It's very conversational, and it's very much like a back and forth. This feels like it could be replacing the subcommittees, but maybe we'll talk with Chair Gravatt and have a conversation about kind of how we move that forward. I will add, and I'd mentioned to Commissioner Collette that we've hired our public works arts coordinator, and she's gonna be great, first of all, because she's got a really interesting background. So we're gonna start picking up the pace on our the arts master plan and implementation of that, which will mean we're gonna start RFP processes, pieces, even commissioning. And I know you all had expressed, there's probably a particular expressed interest about maybe being part of that process. I've shared that with the arts staff, and we're trying to figure out how to integrate that into decision-making around how we start to develop the master plan, so stay tuned on that. We thought about that as being a subcommittee, but I'm not sure, we're gonna have to check in with you. So just add that. Okay.
I have one more slide. I just looked at it right. Okay, so next steps, we'll incorporate any feedback from today, and then we'll refine any of our agenda packets or content packets that we need to based on feedback, and then tours, we will, look at that, we're gonna help line up tours at the recycled water. Oh, boy. There you go.
Nice job. And so that's really all. I know we're running late. I should be respectful of time. That's all we have for today.
So just a final note on this discussion. So there's one piece that we weren't able to give feedback on today, and that's the homework component. The follow-up, not the preparation. So I would offer just a challenge to my fellow commissioners. Between now and our October meeting, if sometime by mid-late September, you can reach out to your networks, have conversations, since our October meeting is our sort of topic setting discussion. I think that would be useful feedback to have prior to that discussion. What's sort of top of mind among our networks, among our colleagues, family, friends, to inform that discussion. So if you could take either personal notes, or if there's anything that comes up consistently or is really high profile that you think the commission would benefit from, you can send me an email with an overview, and I'll try and consolidate all of that and communicate that.
Chair, any topic?
Any within the purview of, unless you have a great recipe, I'm always.
Not even referring to this.
Right, so any topic under the purview of under the jurisdiction of public works
But we could steer.
in the city of Peace.
Yeah, and Chair, we can, if you have questions on the modern zoning code, for example. Those are other things that we can throw in at the end of a meeting, just like the assured water supply was something that's fairly deep, significant change. That's something we can give you an update on, just, maybe quick hitter topics at the end of the.
And do keep an eye out for engagement opportunities. I know there are different programs that are being run by the city and our partners related to the work that we do, and they're always fun to pop in and see how things are going and work with the folks who are engaged in this kind of work. So definitely keep an eye out there. And with that, is there any other business to come before the commission today? Hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Hearing none, the motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.